What's up, guys? Brian Ellwood here. Welcome back to the Virtual Real Estate Investing Podcast. Hope you guys are having an amazing day today. I know I am, although our sunshine disappeared here in Denver and it's going to snow tonight. I'm in my office and I'm excited for this interview. I've got a guy who I've been following for a little while on the show, and I think this is going to be a really special episode. We've got Mr. Lucas Hall. Lucas Hall is an experienced landlord. He's a real estate investor, a national speaker. He's also a husband, a father, and a puppy daddy. And he's the founder of Landlordology and the head of industry relations at Cozy. Lucas, what's up, man?
Hey, Brian. Not much. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being on here. So fill in the gaps if I left anything out of your bio. And also kind of just give us a little backstory about how you got into real estate and kind of tell us about why you're so passionate about it today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And you forgot to mention, I'm also a listener of your show. I actually found it a couple months ago, and it was just good timing because you happened to reach out right at that time. But I love what you're doing. And it's funny that we're both in Denver. So we were, prior to recording, for those who are listening, we were joking about how we should have probably done this in person, but it's great to be here, and thank you so much for having me. And to back it up here, I guess why I'm so passionate about real estate, to answer your first question, is that I think real estate is the fastest and I'm going to be bold and actually say the safest way to actually build wealth. And I think that, for those people who love stock markets and mutual funds, I also diversify and put money into those, but my real wealth and where I'm able to produce equity and money that I can use to go buy houses for my family to live in and buy vacation properties, that all comes from equity and real estate. So I think that it's not something that is rocket science, and it's not something that takes a tremendous amount of education. It just takes some drive and some grit and the ability to learn and willingness to be taught and to have a mentor and to kind of admit when you don't know everything. And if you kind of can nail those things, you can learn how to be a real estate investor. And I think almost anyone can make money, in whatever area they want to go into, whether that's flipping or buy and hold or vacation properties or whatnot. So I think it's just a great way to build wealth, and that's why I am in it. But I also think it's a great way to give back, and it's a great way to just be a member of society. So I typically look at my tenants as customers, and I know that's not true for most landlords, but I have about 20 tenants at any given time across 3 different states, and I treat them well. I treat them with respect and dignity, and I treat them as peers. And so, we have a problem if they don't pay rent. I take it very seriously from a business standpoint, but I treat them like customers because at the end of the day, they are paying my mortgage, and I want them to be happy, and I want them to have a place to live, and I want them to raise a family there, and I want them to, get on their feet and build their credit and do all kinds of good stuff that's going to make their life better and enriching. And I think I can do that through real estate.
That's really interesting. And I definitely want to dive into more about your philosophy on tenants, because you also mentioned that in your blog and whatnot that you believe in self-management over using property managers, which is pretty uncommon in this industry. So we're going to dive into that for sure today. But I'm curious, how did you very first get into real estate? What was it that made you decide to get into real estate? Did you have an epiphany or tell us that story?
So I had no clue what real estate investing was. I was about 25, and I thought that, when people buy houses, it's going to be that one house that you buy after you get married, and then you live in it until you die. And that was my assumption, because that's what my parents did. And that's what my, they're not dead yet, but that's what my grandparents did. And it was just this thing that I saw modeled for me. And that's what my understanding of why you would buy a house. But then I met this girl, and she told me that, it was an exciting time for her because that week she had just bought a house. And I thought, well, that's cool, but you're only 24 or 25. And so I don't really understand how that works. And let alone she bought this house on Capitol Hill, and it was a 5-bedroom house that was pretty expensive in DC. And I thought, well, wow, she's young in her career, and she's doing this. How is she doing it? Well, she figured out that if she goes and she buys a house that she can rent out the rooms, and this was big. She was doing it before Airbnb, and so she went and found a bunch of roommates on Craigslist and got them to basically pay for her mortgage and all of her utilities, and she got to live there and make money. And I thought, this is amazing. Like, we know that now as house hacking on a roommate level, but she was, pioneering that. And I just thought that she's like super smart and super pretty, and I want to get to know her better. So what I did was I went and I said I could do this, and this was a great idea. So I actually went and found a house in her neighborhood and did the exact same thing. And so I thought, well, if one, I want to be close to her because I want to, impress her and show her that I can do the same thing. And two, financially, I just think it's a great idea. So I went and found a 6-bedroom house on Capitol Hill and bought it, and went and found a bunch of roommates on Craigslist. And that was the beginning of my real estate investing career. So I took that, pulled some equity out of it about 2 years later, and went and bought another property, and then pulled equity out of that and bought another property and pulled equity out of that and kept going. And now I've got 5 properties in 3 states, all of which that I still continue to self-manage from afar from Denver. So the best part is about that whole story is that girl that I was trying to impress and that girl that I thought was so smart, we ended up dating for about 3 years, and now we have been married for over 10.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to give you crap if you had let that one go, because I was like, dang, she sounds like a keeper if she knew how to do that, like before the days of Airbnb or anything. So you're a smart man.
Yep, I'm definitely the lucky one there. Yep.
And that's a crazy story, man, because, sometimes it's weird things that cause us to take action on something. Like I've had people that I've, tried to bring into our coaching program or something, just kind of put it off and put it off and put it off for months or years. And then email me one day out of the blue and say something like, Brian, my brother-in-law just bought a rental property, and it pisses me off that he bought one before I did. So you know what? I'm ready to get started with you. I'm like, that's what it took, to get you in the game. Like,
that's hilarious.
But it's an emotional game. I'm putting more and more personal development content into my material because I'm learning that weird things make us move and take action.
For sure. Yeah, I think, finances and decisions like that, financial decisions especially, Dave Ramsey always says it's like 10% intelligence and 90% heart. So it's certainly an emotional response or emotional decision. Even when we're trying to treat real, investing like a business, we still tend to get attached to things. I know I do. I tend to, renovate properties in my head before I even have closed on them. And then it gets me in trouble if I have to bail.
That's great, man. So let's talk about your sort of philosophy. You self-manage your rentals, and I read some of your material. You talk about how many thousands of dollars you save each year by doing that, and also how you've systemized it in a way where it doesn't require a lot of your time. So I'm interested to hear about that. So tell us, I guess, what you do, and then why you think it's superior to, the normal model of finding a property manager and all that.
Right. So I think that, I know that the reason why I self-manage, or at least that I started self-managing, was simply out of necessity, simply because I didn't have enough profit to pay for that manager. And in my very first property, I was actually living there anyway. And so it was a primary residence for me. I was in the biggest bedroom and I was renting these roommates. So, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to hire someone who wasn't on site all the time, especially when I could just be there. So, for me, that's how I started there. And then I just realized, it's not that hard. Like, it's really not that hard. And most of the property managers I knew, they were either super talented and therefore super busy and didn't have time for me in my little 1-bedroom house, one single family home, or they weren't very good at all and they didn't have any clients and they would mess everything up. And so I tend to think, that a good property manager is worth his or her weight in gold, but the biggest problem is they're really hard to find. And so it's really easy to go get your property management license. It's really easy to just kind of tack it onto your real estate business, but it's not so easy to do it right. And so when you find one, you can totally take advantage of it, but they're going to be in demand and they're going to be pricey. So what I did from there is I started learning more and more about landlording and how to treat tenants right, how to maintain properties, everything you need to know about rent collection and tenant screening. And, I learned a little bit through the School of Hard Knocks there. But what it did is it allowed me to like document all this. I started blogging about it. And that's originally how Landlordology.com came around. It was just an educational website where I was just pouring my experiences and my stories and my, literally my blood, sweat, and tears into this website from my experiences with the property. And that's how that site got started. But as a result, I ended up becoming kind of I want to say an expert, but I became really knowledgeable. And I thought, well, I could do this with all the properties that I have. And when I started looking at the numbers, I realized, well, property managers for sure are easier. If they manage it right, absolutely they're easier, but they are expensive. And on average, a property manager will take 10% of your rental income. And then oftentimes, if they have to find you a tenant, there's a finder's fee, which is about another 1 month's rent. So if you average all that out, sometimes they'll take upwards of 17% of your total net or total gross income that comes out of your property. And to be honest, for properties that are inexpensive areas like DC or California or Portland, 17% is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that I could use to take my family on vacation, or I could pay for a new roof, or I could buy a new washer and dryer, and all these things that I thought, well, they're obviously making money on it, so I'm sure I could figure out how to do that. And so I started my my multi-year research for finding tools and systems that would help me as a landlord manage my properties, not just from being in there, but if I move out and live somewhere else, like now, I could manage them from 2,000 miles away, and I could make it automated, and I wouldn't have to chase down the rent. I wouldn't have to go get multiple licenses just to screen a tenant, and all these extra things that property managers have been doing for years, but individual landlords just haven't had the right tools. So I started down that path, and I eventually figured it out. And now I actually work for a company called Cozy, which makes all of those too. So it was kind of a dream connection, but yeah, you set up the right processes, and I don't think you actually need a property manager in most cases.
Interesting. So I guess, from my perspective as someone who uses property managers, if I were to shift to doing it myself, using the tools that you guys use, and I'd like you to just speak to these fears or objections that I'd have to that, is that
Sure. Let's talk about it.
I'd like to know what you do in these scenarios. Because I did self-manage for a little while starting out too. And I remember, and I certainly didn't have a streamlined way of doing it or anything, but I gave the tenant my personal cell phone number, right? Call me if you have any problems. And I thought it would be real easy. And, this guy was like a young, cool Marine. He was going to be gone all the time. Within a week, he was calling me at midnight and 1 a.m. and texting me and saying, "Hey man, there's a bug crawling across the wall." And, I went to Home Depot and bought this $17 part for the toilet. I need you to reimburse me. Right. Hey man, can you put a screens in the window? Hey man, this, that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this house only rents for, $600 a month. So I'm saving like $60 by talking to this guy, and it's driving me crazy. Right. I'd give anything for someone else to be in between me and him. So how do you get around having to deal with that with the model that you use?
Sure. So it all starts with picking the right candidates. So I put a tremendous amount of time and effort into picking people that not only qualify financially and from a background check standpoint as well, but they just seem like good people, right? They seem like reasonable people. And I have, in my 14 years of being a landlord with 20 some tenants, I've actually never had anyone call me at midnight, and wow. Never about a bug or anything. And I think the reason, or a toilet even, there's midnight calls about toilets, and it's not because I'm not doing the business. It's just because I think I picked people who didn't have that expectation that I was at their beck and call. And if I started to think that they did have that assumption, like they felt like they could call me inappropriately, then I would just set the tone. Like I would just tell them, listen, I want you to be happy, but it's not okay for you to call me at this time, or it's, you can call me in the morning, or you can do this. And just set the groundwork, set the tone there for them so that they understand that you command respect, and in return, you'll also give it. And I think that, that works. That's worked for me 100% of the time so far. Fingers crossed, I eventually, probably right after this podcast, I will probably get a tenant who wants to call me at midnight, but honestly, I just tell them, if it's too late, like I've had people call me at 9, and sometimes I'll just say, hey, thanks for letting me know, but honestly, I can't do anything about it right now. So just put up with it until tomorrow morning when I can call somebody. But with that said, I think if your basement was flooding, Brian, right, wouldn't you want a tenant to call you at midnight?
Yeah.
Like, so like I actually do give them my personal cell phone. I know some landlords out there are probably cringing right now, but I pick really good people who don't have criminal records, don't have bad experiences with former landlords. So I check all that out. And then when I feel like they're trustworthy enough to give them my property that's worth $500,000, like I figure, well, I'm already giving them that property to live in and potentially destroy, so I might as well just give them my cell phone. And I want them to know that I'm available for them, but within reason. So, I want to be available if there really is an emergency, like if it's the basement's flooding or there's a fire in the kitchen or something, but otherwise I trust them to be grown-ups.
You said $500,000 property. Is that a multifamily property or single family?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of properties in DC, in Washington, DC, and the majority of properties in DC average about $500,000. So it's just lay of the land.
They've gone up in value over time because you've been doing this quite a while. So
yeah, for sure. And a couple of the houses that I have, though they're not multifamily, they are what I call roommate houses, and I rent them to a group of people that want to live in community and want to live together, and they know each other. So they come in as a group and they fill out the application as a group. But then they're typically just 5 or 6 roommates who know each other and kind of each split up their portion of the rent by their bedroom square footage. So it works pretty well that while it's not multifamily, it certainly is multifamily like.
Got it. What's like the average monthly rent on the properties that you own?
Oh gosh. For my single families in DC, I would say the average is probably about $4,000.
Wow.
But I've got a big mortgage to pay too. So, the properties are expensive. And actually one of the reasons why I rent them as a roommate style house is because I can get a lot more rent. So, based on my calculations, I can actually reap about 30% more rental income from those properties if I were to rent them to a group of tenants who want to go in together and live in community and each kind of be responsible for their own bedroom. It's still one giant lease, but they kind of look at it as like, oh, it's just like the next step after college. And they rent it, and each one of them pays $800 or $900, and then at the end of the day, I'm making $4,000 to $5,000, and my mortgage might be $3,500 or even closer to $4,000. And so I'm able to actually make those numbers work. Whereas if I rent it to maybe a single income or dual income family, while I certainly don't discriminate, they would never want to pay $5,000 for that property because they can go get something else for about $3,000. So yeah. It kind of self-eliminates people, and I'm able to get about 30% more.
That makes more sense to me as to why you do things the way you do. Because for me to bring in $4,000 in rent, if my average house rent's for maybe, let's say $800 or $900 a month, I've got to have, what is that? 5 houses or something like that. 8 times 5. Yeah. Yes. 4 or 5 houses, with 4 or 5 separate tenants. Mm-hmm. And you've got $4,000 coming in from one house. Yet it is maybe 4 tenants, but there's only one HVAC system that can break. It's not 4 of them, so it's less overall maintenance. Exactly. The same amount of rent. And then if you were to hand that off to a manager, you're losing $400 of your 4,000. Or I'm only looking at it as like I'm losing $80 per house. Easier to part with one at a time.
Right.
So have you ever done something where if you had a house that had 4 or 5 guys in there renting individual bedrooms, have like one of the people be the head of the house that sort of collects the rent and is the contact point between you so that you don't have to talk to all of them? Or do you just talk to all of them individually?
Right. So because they're all under one lease and they're all jointly and severally liable for it, I, I can talk to one of them legally. I can just talk to one, and I typically do ask them when they first move in. I'm like, hey, listen, it'd be great if I had one point of contact. Who do you want that head of household to be, strictly for communication purposes, and they'll usually pick one. But I often don't stick exactly with just communicating with that person, because we as a people and we as group of tenants, like they're faulted, like they're gonna mess up, they're gonna forget to communicate, they're gonna forget to like tell the other ones that I'm stopping by or whatever. So what I do is, and this is part of the tools that I use, so Cozy, which is what I use to manage my properties, it's a self-managing tool that or it's designed for independent landlords, and it's completely free. And so I manage my properties from 2,000 miles away, and in it I have this automated rent collection system built in. So that's also completely free. But my tenants in this situation, I've got 6 tenants of this one house, and each one of them pays anywhere from $700 to $900 a month, depending on the size of their room. And they get to decide how much that is, as long as the total equals the total rent amount due.
Okay.
And so I don't care if one of them pays $1 and one of them pays $2,000. Like, as long as the total is due and paid by the due date, then it's fine. And they all have an account. They all log into Cozy, and then they each just set up recurring payments or pay, every month. And they can pay with a credit card or debit card or ACH, and all that's, the ACH is free for them. And then they can see each other's payments. So they know, like, Susie hasn't paid her rent, and it's now like the 31st of the month. And if she doesn't pay by the 1st, we're all going to get the late fee. So, what they end up doing is they end up knocking on Susie's door and say, go pay your rent. And she logs in with her phone. So they kind of keep each other accountable, and they each one of them gets the email notifications that, the reminders about rent being due, and if there's late fees and all that. And then if there's any sort of maintenance requests that need to happen, or we just need to talk about something, we can use Cozy to do that. We can take a picture of a leaky sink or a video and post it. And then all the roommates on that lease get notified of that message and can also communicate about the topic. So, oftentimes, just actually yesterday, I have a washer dryer being delivered, and I emailed all the roommates through Cozy and just said, hey, listen, scheduled delivery is about 2:00. I need someone to be there. And, there was this whole thread of discussion about who was available. So it makes it real easy. And then on top of it, all that communication, all that thread of discussion is recorded and able to be exported if you need it to be. And so you have a recorded history of all the dialogue and what was said, and it's not just done over text messages that get deleted or voicemails that disappear. So, it keeps everything very formal, and it actually keeps everybody pretty honest.
Yeah, because if you did end up in court over something, you'd have evidence that, somebody said this or that.
Right. So I manage all of that interaction between my tenants through Cozy and the rent collection. Man, I've been using online rent payments and then specifically through Cozy for the last 4 years, and I haven't had a single late payment in 4 years through Cozy.
Wow.
And it's simply because they aren't having to mail me checks. They don't have to remember to go to the bank and to make deposits. They don't have to remember to PayPal me or whatever. It's all through a dedicated means, and most of them even set it up to be recurring. Now, occasionally I'll have a situation, one in particular was a guy named Jimmy, and he, it was like the 1st of the month. I woke up and checked my email from bed, which I think we all do sometimes. And I noticed there was an email from Cozy, and in it said, hey, sorry to inform you, but Jimmy's payment isn't going to process today. It's the 1st of the month, and he doesn't have sufficient funds in his account. And so Cozy had tried to make that payment, but realized he doesn't have the funds for it. And quickly, by 8 a.m, sent out emails to both me and Jimmy. And by the time I got online to get on the computer and just kind of try to decipher this and figure it out, I realized, oh shoot, the payment seems to be processing. And this is confusing because I just got an email that said it wasn't going to process. So I called up Jimmy and I just said, what's going on, man? Like, can you clarify this? He goes, oh yeah, no worries. I got that same email that you did. And I just went ahead and logged in and then changed the bank account that the money was going to come from. And now it's fixed. So while there would have been a situation of an insufficient fund charge or it wouldn't process, he got it fixed in like 30 minutes. Whereas if it were a check, it would probably be about 10 days before I get some sort of letter back from the bank saying that the check didn't process. So, because of things like that, he didn't get a late payment because he was actually never late. He was actually processing by 9 a.m. So, things like that, and all these little mechanisms are in place to help keep everybody on track and to make sure that nobody has to get a late fee or nobody has to fail to pay rent due to some sort of faulty system we've got in place.
It's really interesting. Before this episode, when I was looking at what you do and everything, I was like, this is going to be interesting, but I bet he probably can't convince me that it's better to self-manage versus using a property manager. But I'm starting to see the vision, like when technology is brought into the conversation and it's as streamlined as that, I can see a world where property management gets weeded out eventually, right? Because if you could have your handyman on that same thread as the tenants and you, or something to where like they get notified as soon as that toilet breaks too, and they say, "Yep, I'll be over there in 30 minutes" or something. Then it makes it more and more tempting, I guess, the more that you take away from the property manager. So,
Brian,
go ahead.
Yeah, let's be honest. So, self-management of your own rental properties is not for everyone. So you clearly, like, I can give you the best tools in the world, but if you don't have a desire to do it, then it's not going to matter. And for me, that desire was the fact that I could save 17% of my total gross income, rental income. And that was a lot of money. And I thought, well, that's a big motivation for me. So I'm going to figure it out. But for some people, it's like, what, my time or my energy or my mental exhaustion is worth more than that. It's certainly, you can keep that 17%, so while the tools make everything better and more efficient and just easier to handle, because I'm not kidding when I say I spend about 2 hours a month on my rental properties. Like, that's it. And that's good for me. But there is always that thought in the back of your head where you're like, I wonder how my properties are doing. Like, I wonder if my tenants are going to renew this year. And like, you kind of think like what's coming down the pipeline. And so for some people that's exhausting and they just don't want to worry about it. And they really just want to focus on other things in life. And that is fine. But the right tools can help you minimize the amount of effort that you put in. And, but they're only going to work if you still have a desire to do a little bit,
Fair enough. And I could also see a world where, let's say you grow your portfolio and one day you have, 50, 75 or 100 rentals to where self-management would become your whole life.
Sure.
At some point you may decide to hand it off to someone else. But the interesting thing is that if you've got it streamlined enough, that person might be willing to do it for 5% with no lease up fees. So, 5% total.
Yep.
Because you're making it easier than it is for that old school property manager who drives around in the truck with a cigar in his mouth and he's knocking on the door and, screaming through the window and trying to collect rent. Of course he wants 10%. His life sucks. And you're in Denver and you're managing properties and, on the East Coast or the east side of the states, hanging out on your couch for 2 hours a month. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Who wouldn't want to I kind of want to manage your properties for 5%, you probably wouldn't.
Right.
But,
well, you can also take a hybrid approach. So that's kind of what I do even still. So while I've got my system set up to collect rent and that's all automated, and I've got my tenant screening system set up and I've got my online applications and my maintenance and expense tracking and all that, I've got all that in Cozy. But what I can't do online is I can't actually physically give somebody a key. I can't actually open up the door for them to do a showing and let them see the place if they're interested. And so all that like on-site manual stuff, I can't actually repair a roof in Cozy. Like I need somebody there and I need to manage that actual physical repair. So what you can do is you can hire those people out. So obviously you can hire contractors and just have them show up or use lockboxes to get there or have your tenants there. But for showings, when maybe there's no tenants around, there's a couple things I do. So one is if I'm trying to show a unit that does currently have a tenant and I know they're going to leave, they're not renewing, I will typically offer them a deal. And I'll say, hey, listen, I love that you've been around for the last year and a half and it's great, but I'm sorry to see you go. I'd like to show the place. And if you're willing to make some money, if you want to make some money, you can help me out with just a little bit of your time. And I will give you $25 for every showing that you do. And I will pre-screen these people, make sure that they're qualified, and I will set up the times and coordinate all that so you don't have to worry about it. But if I send them over to the house, will you show them the property and tell them a little bit about the neighborhood, answer some basic questions, and then anything that's advanced, just tell them to talk to me. And then out of all those showings, if one of them actually signs a lease, I'll give you another $100. And so what ends up happening is they say, wow, that's easy money because I'm going to be home anyway. I might as well just let them walk around for 15 minutes. They end up cleaning the place because they want it to show well, because they want that extra $100. So they keep it in a nice condition. They are cordial. They usually dress a little nicer. They're not in their jammies, and they talk and present themselves well in the shower. And then they will give a little tour, and then I will usually call that person, that potential applicant, immediately after, and just see if I have any answers or questions or whatever that I can help them out. And so I'll usually do that. And sometimes my tenants will show the place like 10 times. And then we'll finally get one, and I'll sign a lease with that person. And then at the end of the day, they've just made like $300, and they loved it, and it was great. And it leaves the scenario in a really good situation where now I have a tenant who's moving in almost immediately after they leave, and I didn't ever have to go to the house once. Now, that doesn't necessarily work if you don't have tenants living at the property yet, or they've already moved out. So if it's vacant, you can certainly go to a real estate agent or go to a property management firm that's in your area and just say, can I give you $400 or $200 to just kind of be available, or run the same deals and maybe make it a little more expensive, but say like, I'll give you $50 for each showing and I'll set it all up. I'll take all the applications through Cozy or whoever, and I will just screen them and make sure they're qualified. But then all you have to do is show up and just let them go into place. And they will usually jump at that because most of these property managers and real estate agents, they work on a transaction-based environment. And they think, oh, okay, well, that's just like maybe 30 minutes of my time and I can make $50. Like, that's awesome. That'll pay for dinner. Mm-hmm. And so they're not salary-based. They think about transactions, and they'll jump at that. So you can hire property managers on an ad hoc basis whenever you need them. Or at least the smart ones will do that. And it works well. And then at the end of the day, maybe you just took care of a turnover for, less than $500 and you're good. And then you can manage the rent and everything else throughout the lease through your software, and you can self-manage it at 2 hours a month. And then next time you have a turnover, you just hire a property manager again.
Wow. That's really smart. I love that. It actually, the tenant, using the tenant specifically, it reminds me of why companies like Airbnb and Uber are so successful, is they're kind of leveraging resources that were just kind of going unnoticed. Right. And you're doing the same thing with a tenant who's there and making them into a property manager, like a impromptu property manager for a week or two, and they're making money and enjoying it. And you're not having to be there.
Right. And, something that I didn't actually think, I didn't predict when I started doing that was that the tenants that currently live there, the ones that I have, they will often kind of go above and beyond, and they'll be really friendly because they remember being in that situation the previous year or 2 years ago. And what I've discovered is that, they want that person to sign a lease because they'll get an extra $100. And so they'll speak highly of the neighborhood. I've never had somebody lie, but like they'll talk about me, and I try to be respectful. And it's a great way for the new incoming applicant to kind of screen me as a landlord. So they feel more comfortable signing a lease if they have a third party's opinion about me as a landlord and say, because I know they're asking those questions. They're asking my current tenant, like, hey, has he been responsive to the maintenance tickets? And, has he ever treated you unfairly, or does he quickly jump on things? And they'll usually say yes. And that's because I try to do a good job, but that gives them the confidence, that gives the new tenants the confidence to move forward. And I end up getting a higher conversion rate, I think, with lease signings when my tenants actually do the showings than if it's some uninterested party who just is kind of standing in the corner looking at their phone while the people are walking around.
Wow, that's really smart, man. I want to ask you so many more things, but we're sort of wrapping up here, so we may have to schedule a part 2 down the road.
Sure.
But before we sort of sign off here, I wanted to check in with you and see if there's any other things you wanted to say, not like, plugging yourself yet, but just in terms of real estate investing in general, tips for our listeners. Our listeners are basically, guys and girls. A lot of them still have 9-to-5s. They're looking to, create enough passive income to cover their bills so they can stop trading time for dollars and start, really just living the life that they want to live. What would you say to somebody who's in that situation right now?
Sure. Well, rental income is one of the best, easiest passive forms of income that you can have. And I think that the challenge is not figuring out how to make rent work, but it's really how to get your first or second or third property so that you have enough income to start living the dream, right? And then living whatever life you want. And so I think there's a couple ways. Like if I were starting over, right? If I got into real estate because of a girl, but if I were starting over or I was trying to build a passive portfolio, I would probably house hack the first 2. And what that means is where I would go and I'd buy a primary residence that I'd live in. Maybe it would be a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, but it would be under 4 units or a single family house. And I would go get an FHA insured mortgage, which would let me put about 3.5% down. So I would only have to put in a little bit of money, and then I would be in this house. And eventually, maybe a year later, I would move out or rent out the other units if it was a multi-unit complex, and start getting rental income that way. And it's a great way to kind of try your hand at being a landlord. Try it with 1 or 2 units first and just see how it goes for you, and try to set up proper technology and proper processes. And before you know it, you've got maybe a couple grand of rental income coming in that you can then leverage to buy additional properties or buy a bigger house for yourself and move on with your family. So that's what I would do. If I didn't want to be a landlord at all, then I would seriously consider investing passively in apartment syndications. And it's actually something I'm doing right now. I'm trying with a number of different channels, but it's where you might throw $20,000 or $25,000 or $50,000 at someone who is raising money to buy a large apartment complex. And as a small investor, right, like you go in with just 50 grand for a $20 million apartment complex, you own a very small percentage of it. But as such, you would then get a monthly or quarterly rent check for all the rental income that comes in, and then they divvy it up appropriately. And then at the end of 5 or 7 years, oftentimes they'll sell that complex, and then you'll make, sometimes upwards of 100% of your return, right? Wow. So it's a great way to kind of build up money within about 5 to 7 years, and you didn't ever have to meet a tenant. You didn't have to talk to anybody. You just put in your money and let it grow and take it back out. And I like that. If you really don't want to be a landlord, it's a great way to just let your money grow, and then you can diversify and do other apartment syndications. But if you want full control and you want full ownership and you want all the tax benefits of real estate, then I would try a small multi-unit property like a duplex or a quadplex, and just try your hand at it and see what happens.
I love that advice, man. Like if you think about it, if you could get a triplex for $200,000, which you can in the, areas that I invest in, at least like Tennessee and whatnot.
Sure.
3% of that is what, $6,000, You know, you got to have $6,000 and you could buy a 3-unit building for $6,000. You know, obviously the numbers need to work. You know, after you're paying the mortgage, your mortgage is going to be higher, only putting 3% down. So you need to buy right. But that is actually how I bought my first house ever, was with 3% down on a little house in East Nashville. And now it's an Airbnb rental that makes more rent than any rental that I've ever bought. And I bought the thing for, like you said, a few $1,000s because it was under $100,000, you know, back in 2010. And it's become the best rental that I've ever had. It's crazy. And I have a guy who works for me who bought his first house and only lived in it for a year and then made it into a rental. There's something comforting, I think, about the house hacking method, because you live in there first and then you gradually step out and make it a rental versus just, I'm going all in, right? This has to work as a rental. I hope I did this right. You know?
Right. And, you know, for me, when I house hacked my first property, I didn't have a lot of money to spend on contractors. I mean, if you call Roto-Rooter, you know, the plumbing company, they'll charge you $500 for like a shower declog. You know, it's just ridiculous. And so when I could go buy a $19 tool and take care of it myself. So, you know, I learned a lot about that property, and I learned how to fix things on that property. And I learned how the HVAC system worked and how old the roof was and where the problems are going to be and where it might leak and, you know, all those little things. And so by the time I finally moved out, like I knew that property like the back of my hand, and I could easily resolve issues remotely without ever having to go to that property because I knew exactly what was wrong. So, you know, it's a great way to kind of, like you said, get in and gradually step away and be fully aware of what you've left for your tenants.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. Well, Lucas, I really appreciate you being on. You've definitely expanded my mindset and that of our listeners with your approach. It's been really interesting. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Sure. So you can check out landlordology.com, which is the website I started, and it will teach you how to be a landlord from start to finish, and it'll give you all the advice and more than what I've talked about today. But also, if you want tools, go to cozy.co. That's cozy.co. And that is, you know, if Landlordology is the education, let's say, to teach you how to fish, Cozy would be the free tools that are like the bait and the tackle and the rod and the boat. And then we're all get in there with a bunch of friends and we'll go fishing together. So it's kind of like the tools and the education, and they're both for free. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again, man. And to everybody else, we will see you on the next episode. Peace.